When was the last time your buyer was actually in the room when you made a decision about them? Hi, I'm Matt.
And I'm Jasmine. This podcast exists because that question matters more than most marketing teams realize. Let's get into it.
Hi, Jasmine. How you doing?
Very well. It's a sunny day here on the East Coast, so let's get to it.
Excellent.
So there's a quote I want to open up with today. This is something that Mark Schaefer, the marketing strategist, and someone you call your marketing hero, said at the recent uprising. He said that uncertainty is not a problem. It's not the flaw. It's the system.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that we've been talking about VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex systems for a long time. But the way that Mark framed it, the whole room seemed to shift. It seemed to just set everybody at ease, knowing that there is just so much change right now.
Yeah, I felt that as well. What else did you notice?
Well, I think it was just that it just disarmed everybody. Mark had never given that talk before, and he opened up admitting that he was a bit nervous to give this talk, but it was one that he felt he really had to do. And so I found it was just really comforting to see that through all of this uncertainty, it's just something to lean into. And that's something that I think time and time again we've had to do over the last decade or so. But it's really comforting for somebody to put a name on it.
Right. So he talked about different frameworks and case studies. That's what you get when someone walks in with a level of credibility. But what else did he say?
Other than after saying that he'd never given a talk like this before, he spent the next 40 minutes in the fog with us talking about something that he calls malignant uncertainty, about the fact that the norms are gone. Even the question of what laws apply these days is live. And then he broke uncertainty into three different types that I thought were really helpful: objective, epistemic, and subjective. And said most of us get stuck on the third, the fog inside of us.
Yeah, I think it's worth sitting on that. And he talked about marinating as well, about this fog inside us. So here's where I'm going to push because I want our listeners to feel this tension. That framing is really, really beautiful. But I've sat in a lot of rooms where someone reframes anxiety as fuel, and everybody nods compliantly and goes home and nothing changes. What makes this different?
Well, I think probably first of all, the storyteller and the insight that's in it. But there's also the stories that were told. So, for example, one was Mark's COVID story. During COVID, Mark's business went to zero. Who needs a marketing keynote speaker when there's no keynotes to be delivered? So he didn't double down on writing about marketing because for quite a while during COVID, people weren't really buying anything other than essentials. He stopped writing about marketing entirely and wrote about what his customers were actually struggling with: anxiety, leading teams through panic. And by doing so, by listening to his customers and his audience, traffic to his website tripled.
Yeah, it was definitely a set of stories of vulnerability and putting himself out there. But Mark Schaefer has 30 years of credibility. Definitely hard earned, I'll give him that. And he's built a huge, huge audience and the brand equity to survive a pivot like that. You're asking a life sciences product marketer with, for example, a new product launch and a CFO who wants revenue in the next quarter to do the same thing. Be honest. Is this wisdom or is it survivorship bias?
I think that's a fair criticism, but I don't think the lesson is pivot your entire category. The lesson is narrower. Customer centricity is bigger than express needs. When someone tells you what they want from your product, they're also not telling you how they're coping with the rest of their working life. What other problems are they actually experiencing? And that context shapes everything: what they'll read, who they'll trust, and what they have energy to act on.
I think that's an important point. We're not all just sort of single boxes that we fit into very neatly. The deeper signal beneath the surface request. Most buyer research only gets you The strategic layer, what you're describing is the emotional substrate underneath.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if organizations do have that data sitting in interview transcripts, in CRM systems, in places that no one at the planning table really reads, they might read a highlight report, but they don't really dig right into the condition of the customer every single time they're making decisions. And so that's where I think there's a big challenge is that we're not, as organizations, really sitting with our customers enough and not really walking enough miles in their shoes.
Okay, so to that exact point, let's go to the part of your blog that I think's doing the most work. And honestly, the part I want to push on a bit more. You talk about synthetic customers as the solution to buyer presence disappearing through various approval cycles, whether you're talking about upstream in the new product development process or downstream for campaigns. And I want to sort of steelman the skeptic's view here because if we don't, we're just selling.
Go for it.
Okay. So the problem you described, the buyer presence eroding through approval cycles, isn't a research problem. It's a culture and power problem. Legal disclaimers and senior stakeholder pet phrases win because those people have authority, not because marketers lack data. Giving the team a synthetic customer to query doesn't change who owns the decision. You've built a very sophisticated thing to lose an argument with.
It's clear that this is only part of the solution. You can sell people shovels, but if they're not willing to use them, you still don't have a hole in the ground. What I think is really important here is that by bringing to life the voice of customer that you've captured, by turning it into something that is more than just words on a page, but something that you can actually have a conversation with, that actually allows us to bring the customer along with us for that journey. I'm not saying that that replaces the need for customer data. In fact, I say that hopefully what this does is it builds a culture where we're even more hungry for more customer insight, for more voice of customer. Because what I think is really, really important is that we bring as much of that as possible with us on the journey. And so the synthetic customer makes that possible. It makes the buyer quotable, queryable, and present in real time. It doesn't give you the power, but it does reduce the friction of using the evidence you already have. And if you've already got buy-in to be using these as part of a process, you get some implicit buy-in, the synthetic customer to be part of the way that you can push back on demands that maybe move the process away from the customer and back into the organization.
Okay, but the synthetic customers are built from yesterday's data. And in some cases, it could be data from over a year ago. You're in a moment of what Mark might call malignant uncertainty. The rules are shifting structurally. Your synthetic persona was trained on interviews from 18 months ago when the market looked very different. The regulatory landscape looked different. The buyer's emotional state was different. How's that not just a more expensive version of the research problem you already had?
I think it's a real risk, and I talk about it in the blog, and I've talked about it quite a bit. Used carelessly, synthetic customers become echo chambers. They need refreshing regularly. They need challenging. The tool is as only good as the research cycle behind it. But I think one of the things is really important here. Having something that is present with you that you can see, well, actually, when was the last time we updated this? Is so much more powerful than having a report rusting away on a hard drive or a persona document sat in a drawer. Those dead pieces of insight. What I'm trying to show is the way to bring all of that insight to life, to walk alongside you. And yes, absolutely, we need to update those. But there are ways to even use what's happening in the world and that people are documenting on the web to keep things fresher than just 18 months old.
Okay, totally fair. But here's where I actually disagree with some of the framing in your blog, not just the skeptic's view. And this is important for our listeners. The way you've written it, the synthesis problem is about technology. The data exists, the interview transcripts are gold, and the synthetic layer surfaces patterns. But the problem you described in the approval cycle, buyer leaves the room, brand guideline guardrails win, that's a prioritization problem. No one built buyer presence into the process. And until the team believes the buyer presence is their actual job, not just a nice to have, no amount of queryable data changes the outcome. The technology is downstream of the belief.
I think that's fair, but at the same time, everybody talks about being customer centric. So if you're customer centric, there's only one way to be customer centric, and that's to have a buyer presence involved in the process. But it's also why I wrote the line at the end of the blog. We can use these synthetic customers for directional insight, but we still need to be humans making real life decisions. I don't think this is about replacing humans, and it's definitely not about replacing real life human customer insight. It's about bringing that into a directional signal that lasts longer and that is more powerful than a few quotes in a PowerPoint deck that gets presented once and then forgotten.
Okay, so let's make this a bit more concrete for our audience. Maybe you're a product manager or a commercial team leader. You're 6 months from a launch. The uncertainty Mark is describing, regulatory, commercial, buyer emotional state, is completely structural. What's the actual move?
I think that there's a challenge here. And once things shift significantly, all the bets are off the table anyway. So any of the insight we've gathered in the past would need updating and should be updated. But there are ways to use AI deep research tools and to be able to get a sense of where things are going. We need to pivot, not just because we've got better data. We need to pivot because when things have actually shifted for our customers, we need to look closely about all the cascading things. And actually, one of the nice things about a synthetic customer that's built properly is that it will flag that things are outside of its bounds, outside of the data set that it can confidently talk about, and then be able to look at what assumptions should we make about the future. So I think that there's some really interesting things to do here. There is a prioritization problem, and I think we've got to be conscious that we should be prioritizing the customer at the center of everything we do, rather than having great ideas and having the organization thinking that's not how we've always operated. And that's the biggest risk I think we have.
So you end your blog with something else that Mark said, which is leaders dispense hope, and hope isn't optimism. What do you think he meant by that? And what inspired you to put that in this blog?
Yeah, so leaders do dispense hope. It's partly what they're there for. In the face of uncertainty, they're the ones to say, hey, this is the direction we're going to go in. If we do this, this is going to work. That's important, but it's not false optimism, right? If you go in the wrong direction, you're still going to fail. You just might fail with a smile on your face. So you have to have solid strategic insights as to the way to go forward.
I want to wrap this up and say to our audience, if this landed for you, here's the one thing we'd ask you to do. Of course, read Matt's blog post, and the link is also in the show notes. And then do the exercise he described. Go back to your last 3 customer calls. Look for the subjective layer. What are they coping with that had nothing to do with the product? Write it down. It'll change the next brief that you write.
And if you want to push back on anything I've said today, please do. We're both still in the fog on this, and that's really the point.
Well, fantastic. And thanks so much for this really important topic, Matt.
Thank you. For those coming across this on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, you can find us on LinkedIn or the Striven newsletter as well. The link to the blogs in the show notes. So we write about commercial strategy for life sciences, and we look forward to keep seeing you again soon. Thank you for listening to a splice of life science marketing. We hope you enjoyed the episode.
If this conversation helped you, the single biggest way you can support the show is to subscribe and leave a review on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. We'd really appreciate it, and it makes a huge difference.
You can find out more about us and the topics we discuss at striven.com or on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for listening. We hope to see you next time.